I'm 64 years old, and if you had told me 5 years ago that remarrying would nearly destroy everything I'd spent 3 decades building, I would have laughed in your face. But that's exactly what happened. And the only reason I still have my vineyard, my winery, and my freedom today is because when I married Darnell Barnes, I made one critical decision. I never told him or his 3 adult children the full truth about who owned the estate we lived on. Let me back up. My name is LaToya Morrison, though most people in Sonoma Valley just call me Toya. I bought my first 5 acres here in 1989 when I was 34 years old. I was a single mother working as a real estate agent, and people thought I was absolutely crazy. A black woman on her own buying raw land in wine country. The loan officer at Wells Fargo actually laughed when I presented my business plan. "Oh, Morrison," he said, barely concealing his smirk. "Wine production requires significant capital expertise and frankly connections in the industry. Perhaps you'd be better suited to a more traditional investment." I walked out of that bank with my head high and my jaw clenched. I'd heard no before. I'd heard worse than no. But I had a vision, and more importantly, I had something that man in his pressed suit would never understand. I had grit born from necessity. You see, I wasn't always a real estate agent dreaming of vineyards. I grew up in Oakland, daughter of a postal worker and a nurse. My parents worked themselves to exhaustion to give me and my 2 brothers a shot at something better. I got pregnant at 23 with my daughter Jasmine, and her father, well, he disappeared before her first birthday. I was working 3 jobs then, reception desk at a car dealership during the day, waitressing at Denny's 4 nights a week, and doing bookkeeping for my neighbor's tax business on weekends. I remember one night Jasmine was about 2 years old, crying in her crib because I'd been gone all day, and she barely knew her own mother's face. I stood in the doorway of our 1-bedroom apartment in Richmond, tears streaming down my face, and I made myself a promise I would build something. Something that was mine, that was ours, that nobody could take away. It took me 6 years to get my real estate license while working those jobs. 6 years of night classes studying after Jasmine fell asleep, showing houses on my lunch breaks. But I did it, and I was good at it. Really good. By the time I was 30, I was one of the top agents in the East Bay. By 33, I'd saved $40,000. That's when I drove up to Sonoma Valley for the first time. I was showing a client a property in Napa, and on the way back I took a wrong turn. Ended up on this winding road, and suddenly there it was. Rolling hills covered in grapevines, the late afternoon sun turning everything gold and green and impossibly beautiful. I pulled over and just sat there watching the light change. That's when I saw it. A for sale sign on 5 acres of raw land unplanted, overlooked at the far end of a established vineyard. I called the number right there from my car phone. The price was $38,000. I bought it with almost every penny I had. Everyone thought I was insane. My mother called me crying, begging me not to throw away my savings on dirt in the middle of nowhere. My brothers said I was having a midlife crisis at 34. Even my real estate colleagues shook their heads. "LaToya, you're a city girl. What do you know about farming?" Nothing. I knew absolutely nothing about farming. But I learned. I spent every weekend that first year reading everything I could find about viticulture. I drove to UC Davis and sat in on lectures pretending I was a student. I talked to every vineyard manager, every winemaker, every harvest worker who would give me the time of day. And then with my own 2 hands and the help of Jasmine, who was 7 years old and thought it was all a grand adventure, I planted my first Pinot Noir vines. Jasmine and I would drive up every Saturday morning, the trunk of my Honda Accord packed with supplies. I'd work the land while she did homework on a blanket under an oak tree, and when she finished, she'd help me tie the baby vines to their posts. Her little fingers learned the knots before she learned to braid her own hair. "Mama," she asked me one Saturday, dirt under her fingernails, "why are we doing this?" "Because, baby," I told her, "I'm going to build us something that matters, something that's ours." It took 3 years before those vines produced anything worth harvesting. 3 long years of working my real estate job during the week, driving up every Friday night, sleeping in a tent on the property, working the land all weekend, then driving back Sunday night. 3 years of people in town taking bets on when I'd give up and sell. But I didn't give up. By 1995, I had 15 acres planted and my first vintage bottled. 300 cases of Morrison Estate Pinot Noir. I sold them all out of my car trunk and at farmers markets. By 2000, I'd expanded to 50 acres and opened a tiny tasting room, really just a converted barn with a folding table and some borrowed glasses. The year 2003 nearly broke me. A bacterial infection swept through half my vines. I was 48 years old, staring at $100,000 in losses, and the bank wanted to call my loan. I remember standing in that vineyard at 2 in the morning, praying to God, to my grandmother's memory, to anyone who would listen. I didn't sleep for 3 weeks. I worked with my vineyard manager. I'd hired Carlos Rodriguez, by then a genius with vines, who believed in my dream, and we cut away the infected plants, treated the soil, replanted. I took out a second mortgage on my house in Oakland. I sold my car and bought a used truck. I made it work because failure wasn't an option. By 2010, Morrison Estate Winery was on the map. 75 acres of prime Sonoma Valley terroir, a beautiful stone winery building. I'd designed myself a tasting room that seated 40 people and wines that were getting written up in Wine Spectator. Do you know what it takes for a single black woman to build something like that? The 16-hour days. The bank loans I had to personally guarantee with my house, my car, my future. The harvest seasons when I was out there at 2 in the morning checking the crush, my hands stained purple, my back screaming. The late payments I juggled to keep the lights on. Every single decision, every risk, every victory that was me. Mine. But there was a cost I didn't want to see. By the time I turned 60, Jasmine had graduated from UC Davis with a degree in viticulture, but she'd chosen to work at a winery in Napa instead of joining the family business. When I asked her why, she looked at me with eyes that held too much hurt. "Mom, this has always been your dream, not ours. You built this place, but you barely built a relationship with me." That hit harder than any bank rejection ever had. She was right. I'd been so focused on creating security, on building something that would prove everyone wrong, that I'd missed soccer games and school plays. I'd brought work to every holiday dinner. I'd chosen the vineyard over my daughter more times than I could count. By 60, my estate had grown to 150 acres. The property was worth at least $8 million, probably more. I wasn't wealthy, but I was comfortable, secure, proud of what I'd built. And I was lonely. So profoundly, achingly lonely. I lived in the farmhouse on the property, a beautiful 3-bedroom I'd renovated myself, and I'd wake up some mornings and realize I hadn't had a real conversation with anyone besides Carlos in days. I'd spent 30 years building walls of success around me, and now those walls felt like a prison. That's when I met Darnell. It was at a charity wine auction in San Francisco, one of those glittering events where Silicon Valley money meets wine country prestige. I almost didn't go. I hate those things, if I'm honest, too much posturing, too many people trying to impress each other. But my distributor insisted it would be good for business, so I put on my best dress and showed up. Darnell Barnes bid on a case of my 2015 Reserve Pinot Noir. He bid high too, beating out 2 other collectors. When he won, he came straight over to introduce himself. Mrs. Morrison. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with silver hair and warm brown eyes. Handsome in that distinguished way some men achieve in their 60s. "I've heard wonderful things about Morrison Estate. I've been trying to get my hands on your reserve for 2 years. "It's Ms. Morrison," I corrected, but I smiled. "And you could have just visited the tasting room." "Where's the fun in that?" He laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "I'm Darnell Barnes, retired investment banker, amateur wine enthusiast, and as of tonight, the proud owner of 12 bottles of what I'm told is the best Pinot Noir in Sonoma Valley." We talked for an hour that night. He knew wine, really knew it. We discussed terroir and oak aging and the challenges of the 2015 growing season. He listened when I talked about being one of the few black women winery owners in the valley, and he didn't do that thing some white people do where they get uncomfortable or overly performative about it. He just listened. "I'd love to visit your tasting room sometime," he said as the event was ending. "Learn more about your process." "Come by this weekend," I heard myself say. "I'll give you the full tour." He visited that Saturday, then the next Saturday. By the 3rd visit, we were having dinner together. Darnell was recently widowed. His wife had died 2 years earlier. He talked about her with what seemed like genuine grief about the hole her death had left in his life. He'd been an investment banker for 35 years, had retired comfortably, and now spent his time playing golf and apparently pursuing his passion for wine. He was attentive in a way I wasn't used to. He brought me first edition books about winemaking, beautiful old volumes with leather bindings. He planned trips to Carmel and Mendocino, romantic getaways where we'd visit other wineries and walk on the beach. He listened to me talk about the challenges of running a winery in an industry still dominated by men, and he seemed genuinely fascinated by my story. "You're extraordinary, LaToya," he told me one evening as we watched the sunset over the western vineyard. "What you've built here, what you've overcome, it's remarkable." I'd spent so much of my life fighting to be taken seriously, fighting to prove myself that having someone simply admire my accomplishments felt like water in a desert. Looking back, I can see exactly what I missed. But at the time, I was just a 60-year-old woman who'd been alone for most of her adult life, finally feeling seen, feeling wanted, feeling like maybe I deserved something for myself beyond work and worry. We got engaged after 8 months. He proposed at sunset at the western edge of my property, the spot with the sweeping view of the valley. He had a ring that must have cost $20,000 and tears in his eyes when he asked me to marry him. "LaToya, I know we haven't known each other long," he said, "but at our age, why wait? I want to spend whatever time we have left making you happy." I said yes with tears streaming down my face. That's when I met his children. Darnell had 3, Terrence 42, who worked in finance like his father, Shanice 39, a real estate developer, and Andre 35, who did something in tech consulting that he was always vague about. They came to visit the estate 2 weeks after the engagement, and I wanted so badly for them to like me to accept me into their family. Shanice walked through my farmhouse like she was conducting an inspection, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She was impeccably dressed in designer clothes, her hair in a perfect silk press, her nails manicured. Everything about her screamed success. "This is a beautiful property, Ms. Morrison," she said, her tone professionally pleasant. "How many acres?" "About 150, I replied. "And the annual production, we do about 8,000 cases a year. Small batch premium quality." "Impressive." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Do you have any business partners? Or is it a family operation?" Something in the way she asked made my spine stiffen slightly. "It's been in the Morrison name for over 30 years. Terrence wanted to know about the financials. "What kind of revenue does a boutique operation like this generate?" he asked over dinner that first night. "What are your profit margins?" I kept my answers vague. "We do well enough. But honestly, it's never been about the money for me. It's about the craft, the legacy." Andre was the quiet one. He barely spoke during that first visit, just watched with dark, unreadable eyes. A few times I caught him staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Sadness, warning, I couldn't tell. The question that should have alarmed me came from Terrence near the end of the evening. "Since you and Dad are getting married," he said casually, swirling his wine, "have you thought about estate planning? It would be smart to get everything organized, for tax purposes." I was 60 years old and healthy as a horse. I looked at Darnell, waiting for him to tell his son that was inappropriate. But Darnell just squeezed my hand and said, "Terrence is right, darling. At our age, we should both make sure our affairs are in order. It's the responsible thing to do." Jasmine flew up from Napa for the wedding planning. The night before we went to pick out flowers, we sat on my porch with a bottle of my 2016 Chardonnay, and she said what had been on her mind for weeks. "Mom, are you sure about this?" "Sure about what, Darnell?" "His kids." She set down her wine glass. "That Shanice woman gives me weird vibes. The way she was looking at the winery building, the tasting room, the barrels, Mom, I see that look from developers all the time. She was assessing value." "She's a real estate developer, baby. That's probably just habit." "And Terrence asking about your will, Mom, you just got engaged. That's not normal." "They're just protective of their father," I said, but even as the words came out, I felt a small twist of doubt. "He's all they have left since their mother died." "Did you get a prenup?" "Jasmine." "Mom, please tell me you got a prenup." I had. My attorney, Beverly Thompson, I'd known her since my early real estate days before either of us had made anything of ourselves, had insisted on it. "Baby, of course I did," I assured Jasmine. Beverly drew up an ironclad prenuptial agreement. Everything I acquired before the marriage stays mine. The estate, the winery, all of it. Jasmine relaxed slightly, but I could tell she was still worried. What I didn't tell her, what I didn't tell anyone, not even Beverly, was the other decision I'd made. When Darnell and his children asked about the estate, about the property, about ownership, I'd been deliberately vague. I told them it was cooperative family property that had been in the Morrison name for generations. I implied there were other stakeholders, maybe cousins or silent partners. When they pressed for details, I deflected. "It's complicated," I'd say. Or, "There are family trusts involved." Or, Beverly handles all the legal structures. Was it dishonest? Maybe. But something in my gut, that same instinct that had kept me going through bank rejections and failed harvests, and all those years of people betting against me, told me to protect this information. Some part of me, the part that had fought for every inch of this land, that had heard no from every direction and built an empire anyway, whispered, "Don't show your full hand." Not yet. I'd spent 30 years learning that the world doesn't always reward honesty. That sometimes, especially as a black woman in a white-dominated industry, you have to be strategic. You have to protect yourself. And so I did. The wedding was small, intimate. We got married at the estate, naturally under an arch covered in grapevines from my oldest Pinot Noir plantings. Jasmine was my maid of honor, beautiful and worried in her dusty rose dress. Darnell's 3 children stood as his attendants, all smiling, all gracious. Shanice even hugged me after the ceremony and called me Mom, which should have been sweet, but somehow felt rehearsed. We didn't go on a honeymoon. Harvest season was approaching, and I couldn't leave Carlos to handle it alone. Darnell said he understood. He moved into the farmhouse, bringing his furniture, his books, his golf clubs. We settled into married life. For the first year, it was genuinely good. Darnell seemed content to play golf at the club in Santa Rosa, to host his children for Sunday dinners, to sit on the porch in the evenings with a glass of my wine and watch the sun set over the vines. He didn't interfere with the business. He was just there. Companionship. Someone to talk to at the end of the day. Someone to share meals with. I thought maybe finally I'd found my happy ending. But I was wrong. Because in year 2, everything started to change. It started small. So small I almost missed it. About 13 months into our marriage, Darnell mentioned updating our life insurance policies. We were having breakfast on the porch, watching the morning fog roll through the vines, and he slid a form across the table. "Just standard stuff, baby," he said, buttering his toast. "Making sure we're each other's beneficiaries. At our age, we need to be responsible about these things." I picked up the form and started reading. Really reading. That's when I noticed it wasn't just about life insurance. Buried in the 3rd page was language about financial power of attorney authorization to make decisions about property and assets in the event of incapacitation. "Darnell, this isn't just insurance," I said carefully. "This gives you legal authority over my accounts." His face tightened slightly. "LaToya, we're married. Don't you trust your own husband?" "It's not about trust. I just don't sign documents I don't fully understand." He didn't speak to me for 3 days after that. 3 days of cold silence, of him sleeping in the guest room, of feeling like I'd done something wrong by being careful with my own assets. On the 4th day, he came back to our bed with flowers and apologies. "I'm sorry, baby. I just want us to take care of each other. But I understand if you need time to think about it." I never signed that form, but the fact that he'd tried sat in my stomach like a stone. Then Terrence started visiting more often. Always alone, always with some helpful suggestion. "Dad mentioned you might want to expand distribution," he said one Saturday, standing in my winery office. "I have connections in the Midwest market, but I'd need to see your books first just to understand the financials." "Thanks, Terrence, but Carlos and I have the business side handled. We're happy with our current distributors." His smile was tight. "You know, LaToya, we're family now. We want to help. That's what families do." Something about the way he said family made my skin crawl. Shanice was more brazen. She showed up one Tuesday afternoon with a real estate appraiser. "Just for insurance purposes," she explained as this stranger walked through my property with a camera and measuring tape. "With climate change and fire risks in California, you need to make sure you're properly covered." I already had excellent insurance. I'd been managing this property for 30 years. "Shanice, I appreciate the thought, but I need you to stop bringing people onto my property without asking first." "Of course, Mom." She smiled that professional smile. "I'm just looking out for you. You know, comparable properties in Sonoma are going for 12, even 15 million these days. You should know what you're sitting on." After they left, I found Carlos in the barrel room. He was checking on our aging Pinot, and he looked upset. "Miss LaToya," he said quietly, "that woman, she was asking me questions. About the property lines, about whether you own the water rights, about the equipment. I didn't like it." Carlos had been with me for almost 20 years. He knew this land almost as well as I did. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing. I told her to ask you." He paused. "Miss LaToya, I don't want to speak out of turn, but those people, they don't feel right." "I know, Carlos. I know." But Andre was the one who truly unnerved me. He'd come over for Sunday dinners with the rest of the family, but he'd barely eat. He'd just sit there watching his eyes moving between me and his father, like he was witnessing something terrible in slow motion. One Sunday he followed me into the kitchen when I went to get dessert. "Mrs. Morrison," he said quietly, glancing toward the dining room where Darnell and his siblings were laughing. "I need to tell you some Andre." Shanice appeared in the doorway. "Come help me with Dad's chair. His back is acting up." Andre's jaw clenched. He looked at me with desperate eyes, opened his mouth, then closed it and left. What had he wanted to tell me? That night after everyone had gone, I asked Darnell about Andre. "He seems troubled," I said. "Is he okay?" Darnell waved it off. "Andre's always been the sensitive one. Too much time alone thinking too much. Don't worry about him." But I did worry, because something in Andre's eyes had looked like a warning. By year 3, Darnell was getting more insistent, not just about the documents, but about my will, my financial planning, my future arrangements. "Latoya, you're being unreasonable," he said one night, frustrated after I'd refused to meet with his estate attorney. "All I'm asking is that we plan together, as a couple. We have planned together. We have a prenup. Everything's clear." The prenup was before we really knew each other. His voice took on an edge I hadn't heard before. "Things are different now. We're a family." There was that word again. Family. Then came the day that changed everything. I had a meeting with my distributor in San Francisco. I left early in the morning expecting to be back by dinner. But the meeting ended early. My distributor wanted to increase our order, and we wrapped everything up by 2 o'clock. I decided to surprise Darnell, maybe pick up his favorite Thai food on the way home. I pulled into the estate around 3:30 and saw Terrence's BMW and Shanice's Mercedes parked near the winery building. That was odd. Darnell hadn't mentioned them visiting. I walked toward the building, and that's when I heard voices coming from my office. My private office in the winery, the one I kept locked, the one where I kept all my business records. The door was open. I stood in the doorway and saw them, Darnell, Terrence, and Shanice. My filing cabinet was open. Papers were spread across my desk. Shanice was taking photos with her phone. They didn't notice me at first. Terrence was reading from a property deed. "Jesus Christ, it's all in her name," he was saying. "Everything. No partners, no trust structure, nothing. The whole $8 million is just hers." "Keep looking," Shanice said. "There has to be a will estate document, something." "What the hell are you doing?" They all jumped like they'd been electrocuted. Shanice quickly stuffed her phone in her purse. Terrence closed the filing cabinet. Darnell turned to me with that smooth smile, but I could see the calculation in his eyes. "Latoya, sweetheart, you're home early. I asked you a question. What are you doing in my office in my private files?" "We were just looking for the insurance papers," Darnell said calmly. "Shanice was right about needing to update your policy, and I thought I'd help. Those are confidential business documents. You had no right to be in here. Any of you." Terrence stepped forward. "Latoya, there's no need to get upset. We're family. We're just trying to help you get organized. Get out." "What? Get out of my office, all of you. Now." Shanice gathered her purse, her face cold. "You know we're just trying to look out for your interests. But if you want to be paranoid and ungrateful—" "Out!" They left. But as Darnell walked past me, he leaned in close and whispered, "We'll talk about this later, when you've calmed down." Like I was the one being irrational, like I was the problem. I locked the office door behind them and stood there shaking. Then I pulled out my phone and called Beverly Thompson. "Bev, I need you to run a property check. Every document filed with the county on Morrison Estate. I need to know everything's still in my name, that all the filings are correct." "Latoya, what's going on?" "Just do it, please. I have a really bad feeling." Beverly called me back 3 days later. I was alone walking through the vineyard when my phone rang. I could hear the tension in her voice immediately. "Latoya, where are you right now? Are you alone?" My heart started pounding. "Yes. What is it?" "Someone's been filing documents with Sonoma County. Transfer deeds, partnership agreements. Documents that would give Darnell and his children ownership stakes in Morrison Estate Winery." The world seemed to tilt. I sat down hard on the ground between 2 rows of vines. How is that possible? I never signed anything like that." "The signatures look like yours," Beverly said carefully. "But Latoya, I've known your signature for 25 years. These are forgeries. Obvious ones once you know what to look for. Can they do that? Can they just file fake documents?" They can file them. Whether they hold up in court is another matter. But LaToya, this is serious. This is fraud. This is a crime. You need to file a police report. Not yet. What not yet, Bev? My mind was racing. If they're willing to forge documents, what else are they willing to do? If we tip them off now, they might get more aggressive. Or they might run. I need to know who Darnell really is, what he's really done. LaToya, can you recommend a private investigator? Someone good, someone discreet. She was silent for a moment. Then Raymond Williams, former SFPD detective. He's thorough and he's trustworthy. I'll send you his number. Thank you, Bev. And please don't tell anyone. Not yet. I sat there in the dirt of my vineyard for a long time after that call, looking at the vines I'd planted with my own hands 20+ years ago. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. How had I been so blind? That night I went home and acted normal. I made dinner. I asked Darnell about his day. I pretended everything was fine, even though my skin crawled every time he touched me. He never apologized for being in my office, never even mentioned it. The next morning, I called Raymond Williams. Mr. Williams, I need you to investigate someone for me. My husband, Darnell Barnes. I need everything. His financial history, his marriages, his children, everything. What specifically are you looking for, Mrs. Morrison? The truth, I said. Whatever that is. It took Ray 2 weeks. 2 weeks of me pretending to be a loving wife while gathering every document I could find, every receipt, every piece of paper with Darnell's name on it. 2 weeks of sleeping next to a man who might be trying to steal everything I'd built. We met at a coffee shop in Petaluma, far enough from Sonoma that no one would recognize me. Ray walked in with a folder that looked 3 inches thick. Mrs. Morrison, he said, sitting down across from me, I think you should prepare yourself. He opened the folder. Your husband's first wife, Margaret Barnes, died 4 years ago from complications of early-onset Alzheimer's. 6 months before her death, she transferred her entire estate to your husband. A $4 million home in Pacific Heights, investment accounts, everything. Maybe she wanted him to have it, I said weakly. Her sister tried to contest the transfer. She claimed Darnell had taken advantage of Margaret's diminished mental capacity. Margaret's doctor even testified that his patient shouldn't have been making major financial decisions at that stage of her illness. What happened? Darnell had documents. Power of attorney transfer papers all signed by Margaret. The sister claimed they were forged, but she couldn't prove it. The case was settled out of court. She got $50,000. Darnell kept everything. My hands were shaking. Ray pulled out more papers. But that's not all. Darnell had a wife before Margaret, Helen Washington. She died 6 years ago from a traumatic brain injury after a fall at their vacation home in Lake Tahoe. A fall? That's what the police report says. But here's the interesting part. Helen had also transferred most of her assets to Darnell 4 months before her death. Her daughter tried to sue, claiming undue influence. She was blocked by the same attorneys Darnell used for Margaret's case. I felt like I was going to be sick. 2 wives, I whispered. 2 dead wives, both of whom gave him everything right before they died. And now he's working on number 3. Ray's expression was grim. Mrs. Morrison, I also looked into his children. Terrence was sued by a former business partner for embezzlement. The case was settled quietly. Shanice lost her real estate license in Oregon for fraudulent practices. She got licensed in California instead. And Andre... What about Andre? Andre's record is mostly clean, but Ray hesitated. This is where it gets complicated. I have a contact who could access sealed juvenile records. Andre attempted to file a complaint against his father 10 years ago during Margaret's illness. He claimed Darnell was financially abusing his stepmother. I sat up straighter. What happened? The complaint was withdrawn, but according to my source, Andre was pressured by his family, threatened with being cut off financially if he didn't recant. So Andre tried to stop him, even back then. It appears so. Mrs. Morris and Andre might be the only one in that family who isn't a predator. I thought about all those Sunday dinners, Andre's desperate eyes, the way he'd tried to talk to me in the kitchen, the warning I'd been too blind to see. What do I do, Ray? You get out, you divorce him, you press charges, you protect yourself. I looked down at the folder at the photos of Margaret and Helen, at the documentation of a pattern that had been repeating for years. These people thought they could walk in and take what I'd spent 3 decades building. They thought I was just another Mark, another elderly woman to manipulate and rob. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated me. No, I said quietly. I'm not just going to protect myself. I'm going to make sure they can never do this to anyone else again. Ray looked at me carefully. That's going to be dangerous, Mrs. Morrison. If Darnell realizes you know... I've been fighting my whole life, Mr. Williams. I'm not stopping now. I met his eyes. But I'm going to need your help. And I'm going to need to talk to Andre. I arranged to meet Andre at a small coffee shop in Santa Rosa, far from anywhere his family might see us. When he walked in, he looked thinner than I remembered shadows under his eyes. Mrs. Morrison, he said quietly, sliding into the booth across from me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I tried to warn you. I tried to Andre, stop. I reached across the table and took his hand. I know what you tried to do. Ray told me. You tried to protect Margaret, and you tried to protect me. His eyes filled with tears. I was too much of a coward to do it right. You were a victim too. Your father? My father is a monster. The words came out harsh, bitter. I've known it my whole life. I watched him manipulate my mother. When she died, I thought maybe he'd change. Then he married Margaret, and I watched him do it all over again. The way he'd isolate her, confuse her, make her think she was losing her mind even before the Alzheimer's really took hold. Why didn't you go to the police? I tried. I filed a complaint. But Terrence and Shanice convinced me to drop it. Said I was being paranoid that Dad really loved Margaret, that I'd destroy the family if I kept making accusations. He wiped his eyes. They gave me an ultimatum, drop it or be cut off. I was 25, still in grad school, dependent on them. So I dropped it. And Margaret died. And Margaret died. And then Helen. And then you showed up and I thought, God, not again. Not another one. I tried to warn you at the wedding. That day in the kitchen I was going to tell you everything, but Shanice stopped me. She knew. She always knows when I'm about to break. I squeezed his hand. Andre, I need your help. I need you to testify against them. All of them. Your father, Terrence, Shanice. I know it's asking a lot. Yes. He didn't even hesitate. Yes, I'll do it. Whatever you need. I should have done this years ago. It's not going to be easy. They'll come after you. I don't care anymore, Mrs. Morrison. I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of being complicit. He looked at me with something like hope in his eyes. Maybe we can save each other. Over the next 3 months, I lived a double life. During the day, I was the dutiful wife. I made dinners, I smiled at Darnell's children during their Sunday visits, I pretended I didn't know what they were planning. At night, I built my case. Beverly brought in a forensic accountant who went through every financial record, every county filing, every document. We found more forged signatures, at least 15 different transfer documents filed over the past 2 years. We found email chains between Terrence and Shanice discussing asset extraction strategies and timeline optimization. But the most damning evidence came from Andre. He'd been keeping records for years. Photos of documents his father had forged. Recordings of family meetings where they discussed their business model, that's what they called it, like systematic elder abuse was just another investment strategy. Text messages from Darnell to his children about how to handle me, how to gain my trust, how to isolate me from Jasmine and my friends. Ray also found the connection to a lawyer named Marcus Chen who'd helped Darnell with both Margaret and Helen's estates. Chen had been disbarred 6 months ago for ethics violations, but he was willing to testify in exchange for immunity. He confirmed that Darnell had brought him forged documents for both previous wives. It was always the same pattern, Chen told us in a deposition. Get them to trust him, isolate them from family file fake documents, wait for them to die or become incapacitated. He's been running this con for at least 15 years. Why didn't you report him? Beverly asked. Chen looked ashamed. Because he paid well, and because I told myself the women wanted it, that they loved him. I was lying to myself. We had enough to file criminal charges. Detective Keisha Morgan from the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office reviewed everything and agreed to bring it to the DA. But before we went public, I wanted my moment. I wanted to look Darnell in the eyes and let him know that he'd picked the wrong woman to victimize. I planned it carefully. I told Darnell I wanted to have a romantic dinner, just the two of us up at the Western Hilltop, the place where he'd proposed. 3 years anniversary of our engagement, I said. A celebration. He loved the idea. He thought I'd finally stopped being difficult about the paperwork that I was coming around to being the compliant wife he wanted. That Saturday evening, I had Carlos set up a table with white linens and candles. I picked my best wines from the cellar. I wore the blue dress Darnell liked. What he didn't know was that Beverly Ray and Detective Morgan were positioned in the vineyard below with recording equipment and backup officers on standby. Darnell arrived at sunset, smiling, carrying flowers. "This is beautiful, baby, just like when I proposed." We sat down. I poured the wine. We made small talk about the weather, about the upcoming harvest. He was relaxed, happy, thinking he'd won. Then I said it. "Darnell, I've been thinking. You're right about the estate planning. At our age, we should have everything in order." His eyes lit up. "I'm so glad you're finally seeing reason, LaToya. Actually, I was thinking of making you the primary beneficiary of everything. The whole estate. All 150 acres, the winery, the business. Everything." I'd never seen anyone's face change so fast. Pure greed, naked and undisguised, flooded his features. That's wonderful, baby. That's what marriage is supposed to be about. I just have one question first." "Anything, sweetheart." "Why did you file transfer deeds without telling me?" The color drained from his face. What are you talking about?" I pulled out a folder from under my napkin, opened it, showed him copies of the forged documents. "These Darnell, with my forged signature, filed with the county over the past 2 years." For a long moment, he just stared at the papers. Then he looked up at me and his whole demeanor changed. The warm, loving husband disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You've been investigating me. I've been protecting myself, just like Margaret's sister tried to do, just like Helen's daughter tried to do." His jaw tightened. Those women were your victims, just like you thought I'd be." He stood up abruptly, knocking over his wine glass. Red liquid spread across the white tablecloth like blood. "You don't understand anything, LaToya. Margaret was going to leave everything to her sister after everything I did for her. 20 years of marriage and she was going to cut me out. I earned that money taking care of her through her illness. She had Alzheimer's. She didn't know what she was doing. And Helen," he was pacing now, agitated. "Helen's kids were vultures just waiting for her to die so they could sell off everything. I gave her love in her final years. I deserved something for that." She fell and hit her head. "How convenient." "That was an accident," but his eyes flickered just for a second. I stood up, too, facing him. "And me? What was your plan for me, Darnell? Another accident, another convenient illness." He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You were supposed to be different. I actually thought—" He shook his head. "I thought maybe I could just live here, enjoy what you'd built, and it would be enough. But then I saw what you really had. 8 million, LaToya. Maybe more. And you were keeping it all to yourself, so paranoid, so secretive. It's mine. I built it. You're 64 years old. What do you need it all for? You don't have much time left for this place anyway. My children need security. Terrence's firm is failing. Shanice has debts. They deserve a future. So you thought you'd steal mine?" "I thought," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "that you'd be smart, that you'd see how good I was to you and be grateful. But you're just like the others. Selfish, ungrateful." "I loved you," I said quietly. "I actually loved you." For just a moment, just 1 second, I saw something that might have been genuine emotion cross his face. "I loved you too, LaToya. In my way. But love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't secure futures. Love is just a tool, and you were supposed to be smart enough to understand that." "I understand perfectly now. So what are you going to do?" He smiled, but it was ugly. "Divorce me? I'll fight it. I'll tie you up in court for years. I'll make your life hell." "No," I said. "You won't." That's when Detective Morgan stepped out from the vineyard path below, followed by 2 uniformed officers. "Darnell Barnes, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit theft, and elder abuse." The look on his face, shock, rage, betrayal, would have been satisfying if it wasn't so terrifying. He lunged toward me, and for a second I thought he might actually try to hurt me, but the officers were there pulling him back, forcing his hands behind his back. "You vindictive bitch!" he screamed as they cuffed him. "I gave you everything. I loved you." I walked right up to him, close enough to see the veins bulging in his neck, the rage in his eyes. "No, Darnell, you loved my property, you loved my money, But you never loved me. I kept my voice steady calm. And here's the thing you never understood: every vine you see, every acre, every bottle, I built that. I earned it. I fought for it. And you couldn't take it from me because I knew exactly what I had and I protected it. You'll regret this, he hissed as they started walking him toward the patrol car. The only thing I regret, I called after him, is not seeing who you really were sooner. They arrested Terrence and Shanice that same evening. Andre wasn't present. He'd already given his testimony and was under protection as a witness. The trial took 8 months. The media coverage was intense. Vineyard widow versus con artist family made headlines across California. I had to testify about my life, my work, my marriage, my choices. The defense tried to paint me as paranoid and distrustful. If you loved him, why did you lie about your assets? Darnell's attorney demanded. Because women, especially women of color, learn to protect themselves, I answered. Because I'd fought too hard for what I had to risk losing it. Because my instincts told me something was wrong and I listened to them. Beverly stood up. Mrs. Morrison's so-called distrust saved her life and her livelihood. She's not on trial here. The men and women who tried to defraud her are. Margaret's sister Diane testified frail but fierce. He killed my sister's spirit before her body gave out. I knew it then, but I couldn't prove it. Helen's daughter Nicole broke down on the stand. My mother was terrified of him at the end. She told me she didn't want to sign anything, but he kept bringing papers to her hospital bed. And Andre testified against his own family. He was calm, methodical, devastating. I've watched my father destroy lives for profit my entire life, he said. I was too afraid to stop him before, but Mrs. Morrison gave me the courage to finally do what's right. The verdicts came on a Tuesday afternoon. Terrence guilty of fraud and forgery, 3 years. Shanice guilty of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy, 3 years. Darnell guilty on all counts, including elder abuse and conspiracy. The judge looked at him with disgust. Mr. Barnes, you have systematically preyed on vulnerable women for financial gain. You are a danger to society. 15 years. At 67, it was essentially a life sentence. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. The prenup held. Darnell got nothing. His legal fees bankrupted him. That was 2 years ago. Today, I'm 69 years old. Morrison Estate Winery is thriving. We just won double gold at the San Francisco Chronicle wine competition. We've expanded to 175 acres. And Jasmine came home. She's my head winemaker now, and we're closer than we've ever been. We blend wines together, walk the vineyard rows together, make decisions together. She brought her girlfriend to live in the old foreman's cottage, and they're talking about starting a family. You inspired me, Mom, she told me a few months ago. Watching you fight for what was yours, refusing to be a victim, it made me want to be part of this legacy. Carlos just celebrated 23 years with Morrison Estate. We're building a new barn for equipment, expanding our operations. And Andre, he works as a consultant for me now, helping with business development. Legitimate work, fair pay. He's in therapy, rebuilding his life, reconciling with the fact that biology doesn't dictate family. You saved me too, he told me last week over coffee. We saved each other, I corrected him. I never remarried. I don't think I will. But I'm not lonely anymore. I have my daughter, my work, my land, and my freedom. I tell this story now because I want other women to hear it. Especially older women. Especially women who've built something with their own hands. When I married Darnell, I made a choice not to tell him the full truth about my assets. Some people say I should have trusted him, that if I didn't trust him, I shouldn't have married him. But here's what I learned. Protecting yourself isn't about distrust. It's about recognizing that people can change, that you can be wrong about someone, and that your life's work is worth protecting. I kept my secret for 3 years. Those 3 years gave me time to see who Darnell really was, time to notice the red flags, time to build evidence, time to save myself. If I'd told him from day one that I was the sole owner of an $8 million estate, I don't know what would have happened. Maybe he would have moved faster. Maybe I wouldn't have noticed the manipulation until it was too late. Maybe I'd be like Margaret and Helen, stripped of everything, a cautionary tale instead of a survivor. My advice? Know what you have. Know what it's worth. Protect it legally. And don't feel guilty about keeping some cards close to your chest until you're absolutely certain of who you're dealing with. Because love is beautiful, but naivety is dangerous. And your life's work, that's not something you gamble with. Not ever. I still make wine. I still walk my vineyard rows at sunset, touching the vines I planted 35 years ago. I still taste every vintage, still make every blending decision, still welcome guests to my tasting room with pride. The difference is now when someone asks me about the property, I tell them the truth. This is my estate. I bought it. I built it. I own it. Every vine you see mine. Every bottle mine. Every acre mine. And then I smile and add, and it's going to stay that way. Because I was never their victim. I was never their mark. I was never their elderly target to exploit. I was their reckoning. And I'm still here on my land, living my life, making my wine exactly as I always have. Alone maybe, but free absolutely. And that's worth everything.